Commend the bill to the House.
Brendan Horan.
Mr Speaker, I am proud to rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak to the first reading of this bill. And Mr Speaker, New Zealand First supports it to the Select Committee process. But in my first reading, I intend to cover some of the broad themes that ripple through this bill. I believe it is essential to the harmony of our country that we ensure that both Māori and European heritage is brought into the modern world. Now, to know where we are going, we have to know where we have been. And this is the phrase that is often heard, but how many of us actually listen and absorb? Indeed, Mr Speaker, this current government would do well to take heed. And if they did, then perhaps we wouldn't see their reborn, rehashed, back to the future asset-selling failed economic policies of the 80s. Indeed, perhaps there is a way that we could reclaim the Taranaki oil fields through heritage status. Sir, we need to strike a balance where the importance of heritage meets the appetite of progress. And by progress, I mean the development of infrastructure and the provision of recreational and essential services. Now, as parliamentarians, we need to realise that heritage includes sites, icons, buildings, and other features which have taken root and have defined us as New Zealanders since the onset of colonisation. And I give as an example sites such as Arrowtown and Wesley Mission House in beautiful Hokianga. Mr Speaker, one of the pitfalls of modern society, and there are some that would say a byproduct of the austerity regime that this government has orchestrated, is that as a whole we fail to truly celebrate our shared heritage. And to justify that statement, it's very difficult to celebrate when you have to work 70 hours a week to make ends meet in a forced low-wage economy. And again, I will state, to know where we are going.
Order. A point of order. All right, Honourable Donald.
Comments are fascinating, but I notice he's reading the speech. It'd be great to see him raise his skill levels by ripping the notes up and speaking from the heart.
When a member makes a point of order, it shouldn't include some imputations, and I think the members crossed a line in actually doing that. But in saying that, the Standing Orders Committee did make it quite clear that members were not to speak from full text. Brendan Horan. Look, we've had a point of order, and I've ruled on it. Is this a separate point of order? Because I have already ruled on that point of order. Materia Pouhere.
Point of order, sir. The Standing Orders do not, and the Standing Orders Committee did not say that members must not speak from their notes. What they said.
No, I have already. Please sit. I'm standing. I have already ruled on this. I've just said the member must not speak from full text. Brendan Horan. He can. I'm on my feet. The member can speak. He can use full notes, but he is not to read full notes. Brendan Horan. A point of order, Materia Pouhere.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that clarification on your ruling. I also would seek your clarification that under Standing Orders, it is not the role of members of the House to complain to you about whether or not members are considered to be reading from their notes, but in fact it is your role as Speaker to identify that where you see there is a problem.
And similarly, I could say it is not your role to tell the Speaker what they should do. Brendan Horan. No, I've ruled on it. Please sit down. Brendan Horan. Is this a separate point of order? I'll hear it.
Mr Speaker, can you just clarify the ruling then as to when a member is to be identified and by whom when they are not supposed to be speaking from their notes? What are the provisions as to who is allowed to identify that and make a ruling, sir?
Yes, any member can raise a point of order in the House. It's up to the discretion of the Speaker and how they actually interpret that. And if the member who jumped to her feet immediately would see that I did not deal harshly with the member at all. Brendan Horan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm just referring to my notes casually. But I'd like to thank that member over there. We all on this side of the House hope that one day that member will use his head for something other than his mouth, but that day is not here yet. Now, as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, that to know where we are going, we have to know where we have been, and perhaps an example of this is our two main traditions of a heritage nature meeting each other is personified in the famous... I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I can't hear myself. As I was saying, personified in the famous Otaki Ngāti Raukawa Anglican Church known as Rangiatea. Now, tragically, this building, this taonga, was raised by an arsonist. I'm happy to report, however, that this sacred sacrilege was forcefully met by a secular response. It has since been rebuilt, and there is a blend of missionary interest and Māori tradition. Sir, I wonder how many New Zealanders know that Hoturoa, the captain of the Tainui canoe, brought the institution, the kaupapa of Rangiatea to New Zealand in the form of soil from Hawaii and deposited it at the base of the altar of the church. Now, Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First view is that sites such as these are taonga, they are sacred, they should be cherished, they should be preserved, but most of all, they should be celebrated. Sir, I would now draw your attention to section 13 that gives authority to Heritage New Zealand to enter onto land for the purposes of protecting heritage. Now, this is an awesome power, and I would hate to see it ever used indiscriminately. Moving on, Mr. Speaker, I've had the pleasure of visiting the Bay of Islands, a site of great heritage importance. And we all know that this government is enamoured with Sky City and it may daily boast of its pokies, but a greater den of vice existed in Russell, otherwise known as Koroaweka, the sweet penguin. And I only share this story to remind us that European heritage deserves the same protection as afforded to Māori, and how many New Zealanders know or celebrate the colourful history of Russell. Sir, to remind us how grieved Māori were about Russell, in the 1840s it was ransacked and burnt. And now we have such incendiary thoughts rekindled by this current mess presided over by this current government involving Sky City. And I lament that one day perhaps Sky City will be viewed as a heritage site. But that day is not today. Sir, there is obviously an interesting debate to come as to what constitutes or comprises a heritage site and what comprises Taonga. And I would like to reiterate that the first casino in Auckland and its pokies are definitely not Taonga. Sir, New Zealand First supports this bill to the Select Committee.
Nikki Kay.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to speak on the Heritage New Zealand